Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to talk to you about this book, which I absolutely love. But let me say first, welcome to JA Jance. This is our 32nd year of doing book events together, and this is the 40th anniversary year for JP Beaumont. How did we get this far along, Judy?
He just didn't die first.
Okay, so two survivors. Here we are having a discussion. I just love it. I mean, I think anniversaries are important. You know, they're kind of milestones. This is actually the 25th J.P. Beaumont novel. But Judy, you've written at least two novellas for J.P. as well. J.P.
Actually, Beaumont is sort of a sneaky character. He gets into a lot of places where he isn't necessarily expected. He's done several short stories, several novellas, and he has poked his head into two Joanna Brady books and a Walker family book, and recently Unfinished Business. So in the Allie Reynolds book. So he's one of those guys who sort of gets around.
Well, in this case, he gets around all the way up to Alaska, which we will talk about. But I like the way that JP has aged. I mean, his knees bother him in this book. You know, he's not a young and fit policeman like he once was, but he's evolved into what did you decide to age him in real time from the beginning, Judy?
Actually, I did. I don't know. Have I told the story about how I met him on a train?
I don't know, but you can tell it again.
Okay. Well, in the fall of 1982, I had written a book that never sold to anybody for good reason. It wasn't ready for prime time. My agent suggested I write something that was entirely fiction. So I decided I would write a Seattle-based detective story. So I came up with a character. I gave him a name, J.P. Beaumont. By the way, Beaumont derived his name from a friend of mine from Phoenix. Her name was Estelle DeBose. And during a really tough time in my life, she was an incredibly good friend to me. And when one night I went to see her, my life was totally falling apart. And she said, she was from Texas, and she asked me, "Wow, Judy, how are you doing?" And I told her, my life was such a shambles. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't even pray about it. She said, "Well, I'll tell you what, you pray for whatever you need to get through the day, and I will be responsible for praying for the big things. I will pray to see you in your perfect place." And boy, did she do a good job of praying, because here I am in my perfect place, doing the job I had always dreamed of doing. And at that point in my life, it seemed as though that door had completely closed. So Estelle was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, and that's where Beau got his name. And we lost Estelle just a couple of weeks ago, but I still treasure that connection because she was a very important person in my life. Anyway, I gave Beau a name, I gave him a job, I gave him a place to live, and then I sat back to see what he was going to do. And he didn't do a thing. He just sat on his butt. Well, finally, in the spring of 1983, I sent my two elementary school kids to Camp Orcala in the San Juans for spring break. And then I sent myself to Portland on the train to visit a friend from my days in the life insurance business. I got on the train with a stack full of blue line notebooks and a fistful of pens. And as the train pulled out of the King Street station, I thought, what would happen if I wrote this book through the detective's point of view? So I pulled out a notebook, I pulled out a pen, and I wrote the words, "She might have been a cute kid once. That was hard to tell now. She was dead." And it was like a bolt of lightning hit me, because in that moment, suddenly I was on the backside of Magnolia Bluff. I was walking around a crime scene in JP Beaumont's shoes. I was seeing it through his eyes. I was hearing what he heard, what other people said to him, what he said to other people, but I also was hearing what was going on in his head. And Beaumont and I have been together as character and author ever since.
That's a wonderful story. I have been remiss. I forgot to say that the title of this J.P. Beaumont book is Nothing to Lose. And we do have copies, but Judy is coming to the Poison Pen on Monday, March 14th.
Do a live event.
And it's very difficult for her to receive hundreds of books at home to sign. So instead of having them available now, they'll be available autographed copies from March 14th. But the smart money would go ahead and reserve your copy now so that we don't run out. Anyway, that's my pitch. So Beaumont, what's his full name, Judy? I mean, you said Beaumont, but what is JP?
Jonas Piedmont Beaumont is his full name. So when I sat down to write that, and if you look at Until Proven Guilty, the first book in the Beaumont series, you will find that those are still the words that start that book. She might have been a cute kid once. So when I was writing that book, my intention was to write a book. I did not intend to write a series. I had no idea that Avon Books would purchase that book as the first, that manuscript as the first in a series. And I believe JP Beaumont and I are equally surprised that we're still around doing book number 25.
And he is gracefully aged, like
And
you,
yes.
but it does play into the book. Do you know, one of the things I remember most vividly is your book where there were teddy bears involved for children. The Seattle PD had a teddy bear program. I don't even remember what book that was.
It was Without Due Process. It takes me a minute to remember which book it was, but it was a book called Without Due Process. And I've heard from lots of places that took up that teddy bear patrol idea and started having teddy bears in police officers' vehicles. You asked earlier, did I deliberately intend to age him? And yes, I did. I didn't know we would age this long. But Travis McGee hardly ever changed one iota. And so Bo and I have sort of traveled this road together. He started out as a middle-aged homicide cop, and he is now a retired homicide detective. He's living in Bellingham, Washington with his third wife now, Mel Soames, who is the chief of police in Bellingham. And he's trying to figure out how to be a house husband, and he's not really good at it, but he's doing his level best.
And he has a fabulous dog. I have to say, we see the dog, because what Bo goes to Alaska, we'll get to that, but Mel and the dog stay home. And so the dog is more often viewed through Mel's eyes in phone calls and so forth than on the page, but I really love the dog. Have you actually owned an Irish Wolfhound?
Actually, in the late 80s, one of our sons was going to school in Pullman, Washington, and he and his girlfriend broke up briefly, and he was lonely, so he went to the pound and he got a puppy and brought it home. And then he and the girlfriend got back together, and she didn't like the puppy, so the puppy came and lived with us. And at the time his name was Boney, and at the time I was housebreaking him, he was so little that I could carry him up and down the stairs in one hand. Well, pound puppies don't come with papers. And he started growing, and he grew. So about 6 months in, I said to our vet, "What kind of a dog is this?" And he said, "Well, it's a black and tan Canardly." I said, "Really? What kind of a dog is that?" he said, well, you can hardly tell what kind of a dog this is, but I think he's probably half German Shepherd and half Irish Wolfhound. And actually, I know that's true because at a grocery store one day, I met one of Boney's brothers, and Boney looked like an Irish Wolfhound with German Shepherd undercoat. At the store, I met a dog that looked like a German Shepherd with Boney's hair. So Boney lived with us for 11 years, and actually he showed up in the first Walker family book, Hour of the Hunter, being called Oho, which is Tohono O'odham for bone. So yes, I have a personal experience with Irish Wolfhounds. And yes, unfortunately, I have a personal experience with what happens when an unsuspecting homeowner attempts to flush a piece of frozen solid Irish Wolfhound doo-doo down an inside commode.
I wondered if you'd written that
It
for real
happened.
life.
You know, I'd like to put pieces of my own life into the book, and JP Beaumont's plumbing problem, I'm sorry, is personal experience. It's the voice of personal experience speaking.
You forgot to judge capacity and created an ice dam. I know, I thought about that because we have 2 new puppies, and when it poured rain and was cold yesterday, they thoughtfully pooped in the house because they didn't feel like going out in the, you know, but they're little. So as I'm flushing it down the toilet, I thought about your book and I thought, I'll be okay. They're little dogs.
Well, there's a big difference between dachshund-sized problems and Irish Wolfhound-sized problems.
They're Cavapoos and they weigh about 13 pounds. So, you know, anyway, it did resonate with me also as a person housebreaking a dog, but I'm not sure they're ever going to be willing to go out in bad weather. And bad weather is a big feature of this book because the climate change has meant that Washington, Western Washington, up where you are, has really had some bizarre weather. In the last 2 or 3 years, it's been unusually hot or unusually cold.
Well, weather is weather, but part of the problem with this book is it takes place in wintertime Alaska. And somebody asked me, well, why did you set this in Alaska? Do you have connections to Alaska? Well, actually, I've been to Alaska 5 times total. 4 of them were on cruises. Those happen in the summer. 1 was for Left Coast Crime and 1 was on a book tour. So my experience in Alaska is strictly non-winter Alaska. But I had to set this book in Alaska because this is actually a sequel to Beaumont book number 14, a book called Breach of Duty. In that book, Beau is still working at Seattle PD. His partner at Seattle PD and homicide is a woman, a single mother named Sue Danielson. And he works with Sue. He doesn't really know that much about her other than she's divorced and she's raising 2 young sons. But she is divorced from an abusive husband, and eventually the abusive husband comes back, and their 2 kids, the older son, Jared, and Christopher, are in their bedroom when this terrible argument breaks out between their parents. And Jared calls Beaumont and says, what do I do? What do I do? And Beaumont has figured out how dangerous Sue Danielson's husband is. And he says, take your brother, go out the window, hide up by the troll, which was just a couple of blocks from their house, and somebody will come and get you. And the thing is, Beau is afraid that in this volatile situation, if a whole crew of cop cars descend on the house, it'll make it that much worse. And he thinks if just 1 cop car shows up, he can maybe help de-escalate the situation. So he drives up, goes into the house, and he's too late. The kids are out of the house, but he is too late because Sue Danielson is already lying propped up against the living room wall. She's been shot, she's bleeding out, she's dying. And Sue Daniel, I did that for a reason. All people sort of pretend that domestic violence is something that happens to somebody else. Well, it wouldn't happen to anybody, I know. But the truth is, domestic violence does happen to people we know. And my readers knew Sue Danielson by then. And they were shocked by what happened to her. And so was JP Beaumont. It was a watershed moment in his life. Sue Danielson's death resulted in him leaving Seattle PD and eventually going to work for the Attorney General on the Special Homicide Investigation Team, AKA SHED, and eventually meeting Mel and living this new life. But ever since, he has been plagued by nightmares where that whole scenario plays out over and over and over, and he relives it every time. So in this book, after he deals with his plumbing issue, there's another knock at the door, and he sort of thinks it's the plumber come back for more money. But in fact, there's a young man wearing priestly attire standing on his doorstep, and Bo thinks, you know, what has something gone wrong with the Catholic Church, and they're sort of having to send people out door to door like Watchtower. And the young man introduces himself, and it's Sue Danielson's older son, Jared, who is a newly ordained priest, come to ask Bo for help because his younger brother, Christopher, has disappeared. Well, obviously, Beaumont is going to, he's not going to turn that job down. If Sue Danielson's boys need him, he's going to be there for them. So why did I set this in Alaska? Well, guess what? Sue Danielson's husband and his whole family came from Alaska. So I couldn't very well go back and change them to coming from someplace else because that history was already there. I sort of have to live, I have to write within the guidelines of what I said in previous books. So that's why this book is set in Alaska.
Well, it meant a lot to me because my winter house guest, Dana Stabenow, actually lives in Homer, Alaska, and I have been there, and I have been there in the winter. So, you know, the landscape of this book was very familiar, and I thought there's a great scene eventually at the Homer airport, which I have flown in and out of. So I thought you did it really well. Halibut Cove across Katchaback Bay, right there. And then Judy gets to introduce a really fabulous character that unfortunately I'm not sure can ever leave Alaska to appear in another book, but I'm going to lobby very hard for our Twink.
For Twinkle Winkleman. You know, when characters sort of pop into my head and they come in with all of their baggage attached. But I write murder mysteries, so I watch what Bill calls blood and guts TV. I watch true crime on ID Discovery because it's a way of learning forensics. It's a way of seeing officers conducting interviews with suspects. It's a way of seeing how they deal with grieving families, both the grieving families of the murder victim as well as the grieving families of the suspect, because that grief it's two-sided grief. It's not just one-sided. So I watch a lot of that. Bill loves home and garden TV, and he also is a gearhead. And for years, he never missed a single episode of a book called Wheeler Dealers. And they were these two guys. One would go out and buy some sort of iconic car and then he'd bring it back. And the other guy, handsome guy, would rebuild the car and fix it up, and then they'd sell it. So Bill and I watched TV together. So I automatically watched Wheeler Dealers. So one day they bought a 1954 International Harvester Travelall. Well, I knew International Harvester did tractors. I had no idea that in the 50s, they built a precursor to every Suburban you've ever seen on the road. And so they fixed it, put this gigantic luggage rack on top of it. And as soon as I met Twinkle Winkleman, I knew she had to drive an International Forester Travelall.
Which just plays a significant role in the book. So, you know, I sort of wish there'd been an illustration of it because, you know, it's kind of hard to fully envision it. It comes with, she has overalls, a complete toolkit, and all the spare parts that you might ever want in the vehicle because it's constantly falling apart.
Well, when Twinkle, when I thought of her name, it made me laugh because it made me think of that old Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue, because her father was the one who saddled her with that name, and she's been mad at him about it ever since. And the only real good thing he ever did for her was give her the Travelall. But Twink wasn't a character who would color between the lines because I met her, she shows up at the hotel and she drives Bo around in Anchorage. And I thought that was going to be the end of it. He had a good vehicle, he had snow tires, he was going to be good to go to Homer. And then Mel reminded him, you know, you're not as young as you used to be, and maybe a guy with 2 titanium knees shouldn't be out shoveling snow along the highway. Maybe you should get a driver. So Twink ends up driving him to Homer, Alaska. I thought she'd drop him off in Homer and go back to Anchorage. No way, she's still there for the crashing climax.
She really is. I know, it was amazing. Every time I thought she'd left, she reappeared. But one of the great things about this book is that because Sue Danielson was a cop and the story of her murder is familiar, Bo, even though he's not a policeman anymore, is able to call upon people still in law enforcement and people like Twink and all to help him because this is too big an investigation. Basically, it's a missing persons case. And Christopher has been gone for what, 12 years? I'm trying to remember.
He's been gone for a long time. And so many missing persons cases really do go nowhere because, and in Chris's case, the people in Alaska thought he had gone back to Ohio to live with his other grandmother, and the grandmother in Ohio thought he was safely in Alaska, and he disappeared and nothing happened. My other really favorite character in this book is Harriet Raines, Harry Raines. She is half Anglo, half Indigenous Alaska Native. And she comes equipped with a whole lot of wisdom. And Beaumont is old enough now that he's willing to accept wisdom. I really like that about him. I like that he has learned to know what he knows what he doesn't know, and he's willing to listen to it.
And accept help, which I think is important. Now, the reason that Christopher has been missing, but nobody has successfully looked for him, is that all that violence that happened when Richie shot and killed Sue, it basically split up the families. I mean, they weren't close in the first place, but Sue's parents lived in Ohio, and that's where the boys went first. Richie's parents lived in Homer. And when Christopher decided to leave Ohio and go to Alaska, that's where he went. But there was no communication between the grandparents, the two sides of the family, based upon all these awful things that happened. And also the nature of the grandparents, because at least one of them is not a wonderful person anyhow. And so this kid just kind of, you know, the cracks are there, right? And nobody is willing to talk over them.
The cracks are there, and yet for a brief moment in time, he found a wonderful, loving relationship that has not gone away. That relationship, even though he was gone, the girl who loved him still loves him. And Danitza is actually, she's named after a good friend of mine from Bisbee. Danitza is gone now, but Danitza is a true blue character, and I really like her.
I wondered if you based her on your daughter, who's been raising a child since your son-in-law died from melanoma.
I'm sorry, that question
I
sort
said,
of.
I wondered if she were based upon your own family where, you know, your son-in-law died of melanoma and left your daughter to raise a child.
Well, not that may be partially true, but if it is true, it happened without my necessarily being consciously.
Well, I thought of it because I know the story, because, you know, we talked about it over the years.
Well, you know, the thing that's interesting to me is that stuff gets into my books without my noticing. In the 3 books I've written in the course of the pandemic, I notice each one of them has something to do with Christmas. And it's like, all right, the universe can take Christmas away from us because of the pandemic, but by God, I'm going to have my holidays in fiction.
That's true. It is a Christmas time. Well, it's a December book anyway. And, you know, Christmas is there in the background. In fact, some of the places that we go in the book, they're, you know, already decorated. Bo, in fact, made kind of a squirrely effort to do some decorating at home before he went off to to Alaska.
Well, but I didn't realize that until long after the fact, that I was putting the holidays in every book, and that's why we all needed holidays.
We absolutely do. Anyway, we can't tell you a lot more about the plot without spoiling it, but this is a really interesting investigation, and it requires a lot of different expertise and a lot of different contexts in different places to bring this whole thing together. And towards the end, you can see where it's going, but then you're not sure that it's going to successfully conclude. Well, so I have to say it's a very satisfying resolution.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. I appreciate that. The thing, when I was on the reservation, one of the principles of Tohono O'odham storytelling is that a story must end where it begins. And in this book, in a very real way, the story begins with Bo re-encountering that terrible nightmare. Mm-hmm. And the story begins with the nightmare and it ends with the nightmare.
Yes, it is a nice circular structure. And I think that it's a very powerful depiction too of how violence echoes down, you know, and affects so many people in so many ways, you know, the immediate family, but it affects colleagues, it affects friends and all. Domestic violence is a terrible thing.
It's like a volcanic eruption with tsunami waves going in every direction. And the fact that the family was so splintered in the aftermath of Sue's death, as far as the grandparents not communicating with one another or allowing the kids to interact with both grandparents. That kind of division happens, I think, more often than not in cases of domestic violence, where long afterwards you have one part of the family refusing to allow the other part of the family to even see one another. In fact, I have a fan. I believe I'm going to meet her in person for the first time ever at the Tucson Festival of Books. But her son and daughter-in-law divorced, and the daughter-in-law won't allow the grandchildren to visit. And she has kept the Christmas tree up for 4 years now, hoping the granddaughter will come home.
Well, I have no answer for that. I think it's terrible that adults visit those sorts of things on children for, which are scarring and can really warp personalities all life long. One of the things, Judy, that I thought you did really well in this book is that Christopher, who's missing, we get an initial picture of Christopher, largely through Jared, his older brother. And then as the book progresses and we meet more people who knew Christopher, that picture changes. And I like the way you did that.
Well, when you see what a gift Christopher gave to his boss in the diner,
Yeah.
I actually just got goosebumps on my leg talking about that incident, because this sketch that he dashed off on a placemat becomes this holy icon for the owner of that restaurant. And it's wonderful that Christopher's son gets to go there and see that even though his father died young, his father was still a hero to the guy who used to be his boss.
Well, I think, you emphasize that a true portrait painter sees the reality of the character, not just the facade and not just, the fancy clothes and whatever else, but can really penetrate to the soul of it. And interesting, I just read Brad Meltzer's new book that we're debuting on Sunday, March 6th. And he too has an artist, very different character, but she has that same ability and actually works for the Army. I don't even know this is true. I'm going to have to ask Brad this, but according in the book anyway, the Army actually has an official Army portraitist, Army painter, whatever you want to call it, to make records of things and all, which I find fascinating. I mean, I really want to know if it's true. Just, because you can make stuff up.
I'd be willing to bet that it is true.
Well, I have a feeling it is. And I think that's fascinating that in our era of, instant photography and Instagram and all the rest of it, that drawing somebody, looking at them with an artist's eye, with a real penetrating eye, can produce a much more effective portrait than a camera. We've all gotten so used to cameras anymore,
And we meet Chris's talent initially,
Yeah.
right there in Beau's living room when he sees a portrait of Sue Danielson that Christopher drew.
So I also like the way that Beau stays in touch with Mel. I mean, he's learned that marriage requires communication. So, even if he's off in Alaska, he's pretty good about staying in touch.
But he's off on his own case. But when a devastating case ends up landing on Mel's shoulders in his absence,
Yeah.
he is supportive of her too. And I think they have a very real partnership. They met while they were both working for the Special Homicide Investigation Team. So they met as equals and as colleagues before they ever fell in love and married. And they also had the advantage of having done that when they weren't too young. They were old enough to value each other's talents and background. And I think it's a real portrait of a successful partnership and marriage.
I think it is too. And it doesn't hurt that they are bound together to caretake the dog. They're very good about their caregiving. This dog is not left in dire straits, even though the Russian Wolfhound really does not like cold weather, really does not want to go outside, hence the original plumbing scene.
Well,
but anyway, the dog is great.
Our original Boney came from Washington originally But after spending a year and a half in Tucson, when he came back, he didn't want to go out in the rain. So there you are. And,
I know. We
Sarah,
have two of those right here. So thank God it stopped raining. So let me ask you, oh prolific one, what is your next book coming up? Are you moving back to a Brady?
I'm finishing up the next Alley book right now. And then after that, I don't know which book I'll be writing for HarperCollins, but I'm working on a book called Collateral Damage. And I can't tell you the exact pub date of that book because that book is having a late delivery date. I think the COVID stuff finally got to my creative process, and I've really struggled with this book. And so when Simon and Schuster told Amazon that there would be a delay in the pub date, somebody at Amazon posted that Collateral Damage would be published on December 1, 2045, which no.
Now, you know what, that is strangely enough, Judy, that is the default date that everybody seems to be using when they don't know what the actual date is. I've run into it several times, so it's not just you.
Well, okay, well, my readers have been very concerned about that.
Well, I think in a way, because it's absurd, you know, if they said, well, maybe 2023, then there might be some question or something. But because 2045 is ridiculous, it basically says to everybody, we don't know what's going to happen to this book, so just hang on.
Well, my readers immediately wrote to me and put me under the gun about that. And so I wrote a blog about it.
Right. Well, I've learned to ignore it after that happened to us with Jim Rollins, the first one. All of a sudden, his pub date moved from 2020 to 2045. Everybody went, "What?" So the pandemic is caused a lot of problems for publishers, and the worst problem that publishers are having at the moment is there's a terrible paper shortage, and it may get worse. And so it's harder to get backlist because the premium is on the new books. And so as a reader, you have to be patient waiting for things to reprint, and there just isn't enough paper. And the delivery services are also overstressed that
yes, I was concerned about having books come here to be signed and then shipping them on. We had with the last book where we were dealing with a dreadful snowstorm, that was an ungodly mess.
And the one before we sent to your old address, you had to go and pick them up, which I still feel guilty about.
Yes, the books were stacked outside. It was a good thing it didn't rain.
No kidding. It taught me a lesson though. From now on, I verify the author's address because, just assuming that nobody moved, or if they moved, they would tell you, is a serious mistake. So I learned from that, but I was sorry it happened to you. And I was grateful you found them.
Well, we did.
Indeed, we did.
And I was not arrested as I was retrieving them.
Would have been a great story, right? Author arrested for stealing her own books off the porch. Terrific. Anyway, so the only other question, which Patrick, come and join us, Patrick, which always gets asked, so I might as well ask you, is there any evidence of movie or television interest in any of the series at the moment?
No, someday in the far distant future, someone will write JP Beaumont, the musical, and it'll be my kids and grandkids who auction off the rights to that. But no movie, no TV, not happening.
Okay. Patrick, are you there? There you are.
I am here. Yeah, let's see. A lot of your fans tuning in, Judy, from all over the place, it looks like. Let's see. I got some good questions. Our good friend Christina has two questions. The first one is, what's better or worse about the publishing industry today versus when you began? Big question.
I think it's a lot less personal than it was when I started. I I am still in touch with John Douglas, who was my original editor back in the early 80s. But the thing about publishing is I'm a long way away from it. I live on the West Coast. Most of the publishing stuff happens back east, and it doesn't impinge on me that much. So I'm not going to say one way or the other. Well, we'll have to try Christina's other question.
Okay. Let's see here. I'm sure Barbara could answer that question though.
Well, from a different perspective, I would agree with Judy that it is often less personal, just because the size of the publishing companies and conglomerates has grown so that, you know, it's the scale of it has vastly increased. But the good news is, because there are 5 major publishers now, down from however many it was somewhere in the 30s or 40s when I started the store in 1989. There are a lot more small operations that are growing up. But the problem, of course, with the smaller companies is they don't have the capital to pay authors enough money to write professionally full time and so forth. So, you know, it's kind of a trade. And then technology has had a huge impact. Everybody thought that the ebook would kill print publishing, but it hasn't. Audiobooks have taken up a big share of the market, but they still haven't killed print. Actually, there were more print books sold, I think it was in November, than ever or something, whatever the statistics are. And I think the pandemic has brought people back to reading, and, you know, we're all stuck at home. We're all
Back
stuck
to
at
reading
home.
and rereading. I've heard
Yeah,
lots
a lot of classics. We've noticed a tremendous turnover in what we call our classics section, for example, which didn't happen when people had more things to do. So, you know, I don't know where we're going from here. I think it's kind of uncharted. But Judy and I survived so far, so I'm pretty sure that we'll just
So far, so good.
Yeah.
As long as
All
people
right.
have a desire for story, you know, that doesn't seem to be going away. Let's see. Christina's other question was, how do you keep all the characters and backstories in your series straight?
Sometimes I have to reread the books. When I was writing Sins of the Fathers, which is a book where a character who showed up in book number 4 turns up in Beaumont number 24. And I was really shocked when I met Beau as he was when I first created him, because back then he was a player, he was still drinking a lot, and he doesn't get sober up. He doesn't go into treatment until book number 8, and this was book number 4. And when I found him having a one-night stand, I was really shocked. And sure enough, time passes, and when Sins of the Fathers starts, he opens the door and there's a guy with an infant in an infant seat standing on his doorstep. And it turns out that infant is JP Beaumont's granddaughter, the daughter of a daughter he never knew he had from that one night stand. And so, well, the past sometimes does come back to haunt you, but sometimes I have to reread books to see exactly how stuff played out.
Well, this is kind of a related question from Gail, who asks, what would you say is the most significant change in JP Beaumont since the beginning of the series?
Well, he started out at age 41 or 42, and now he's in his 70s. But when I started writing about him, his book is told in the first person. He's a cop. He couldn't be at work all the time. And so I had to figure out something for him to do when he wasn't working. Well, you're supposed to write what you know. And it turns out, having spent 18 years of my life with a guy who died of chronic alcoholism at age 42, I happen to know a whole lot about just a minute, I happen to know a whole lot about drinking. And so I had Bo do the kind of drinking I had lived with for all those years. And so the fourth book came out, and I was in Portland doing a signing at a B. Dalton's, and a woman came up to me and she said, you know, Bo drinks every day. He has a drink of choice. It's starting to interfere with his work. Does JP Beaumont have a problem? And I looked at her and I said, you know, these are books. But in the course of that set of signings, 6 other people asked the same question. And I finally realized they were right. He did have a problem, because what I had written was an absolutely realistic portrait of a problem drinker. So Bo has his first undeniable blackout in book number 7, where he has a blackout, and when he smashes his fingers at a wedding reception, he doesn't remember what happened to them. So he sort of can't budge his way around that. He goes into treatment in book number 8. This is Beaumont number 25. So he's been sober for a lot more books than he was drinking. I still have people who tell me they liked him better when he was drunk. I worry about them. But that is the most significant part about JP's character, because I've heard from people who have written to me and said, watching Bo struggle with his drinking problem helped them in their struggle with their own. And so in terms of character significance, I would say his getting sober is it.
Let's see here. Well, we have a number of people that are just saying how much they love Twink again. And would you consider a spin-off series with Twink as the protagonist?
I don't want to, I'd have to learn way too much about Alaska.
Might be fun.
She's not going to transplant easily. I mean, I had the same reaction, like, you know, can we keep her? But then I recognized that she's really not
Uh-oh.
gonna, she wouldn't be Twink outside of her, you know, where she is. That culture, that landscape that she's in, she isn't going to translate well.
Yes, I don't think she could be transplanted to someplace else.
Let's see here. Just about Bisbee in general, Luann makes a comment. She says, I visited Bisbee because of your books, which I'm sure you must hear all the time.
I do.
That's really nice. Do you keep in touch with a lot of your friends from Bisbee and Warren and that background?
I hear from a lot of them. I've heard from a couple just in the last 2 days, and I value those connections. I value my hometown roots, because so much of who I am comes straight from living in that small mining town as a child and a young adult. So I value it, but I can't live there anymore. I have to live where I live now.
Right. Let's see. Anybody else send in your questions? Now's your chance. What else do we have here? Since you're so prolific and writing 3 different
I'm
series.
sorry, excuse me. You have just used the evil P word.
Prolific?
I do not like to be called prolific. Yes, I have written a lot of books, but prolific applied to books sounds as though you just pop them out willy-nilly, hell's bells, it doesn't matter, it doesn't take any effort, and that's not true. I would rather be called a productive author than a prolific one. So yes, I'm a productive author. Now what's the question?
I'd never heard the negative connotation with prolific. Did you, Barbara?
Well, no, I can see Judy's point. I think occasionally when I say prolific, there is sort of an indication that, you know, it's like William F. Buckley or something, you know, just kind of.
Well, I have a serious reaction to the word prolific, and
you're entitled to it. So
there was an article in the Star about the upcoming book festival, and 11 column inches, that young woman managed to use the word prolific 3 times, and I was permanently plucked.
I like productive. Anything productive is a very good word. So I'll try to remember not to refer to you as a prolific author in the future, because I did when we started this, and you didn't smack me then.
Well,
Wow.
I've gotten tougher.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. What was the question anyway?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about since you're so industrious, I hope you like that word.
Okay, that's
And
good.
have a great work ethic. How do you get all the pages out? What's your working schedule like? Do you have a set number of words that you shoot for each day, or how does that work?
I work every day. I try to get scenes to come to order. I've been struggling with a scene for 2 days, and I realized that I didn't have it in the right sequence in the story. So I get up in the morning, I answer my email, I read the newspapers, fix breakfast, and then after I get my steps, I spend the afternoon working on the book. And I work every day. When I bought my first computer, David Grimm, the guy who sold it to me, fixed it so that every morning when I booted my computer up, and that was 4:30 every morning because I was a single mom with a full-time job and I could only work before I got the kids up to go to school. Every morning when I booted the computer up at 4:30, the words that flashed across the screen were these: a writer is someone who has written today, and today I qualify.
Wow, that
That's
is
great.
really nice.
That is great. Here's one you don't hear very often. If you could have a meal with any author or famous person, living or dead, who would it be and why?
I would like to have afternoon tea with Agatha Christie and Daphne du Maurier.
Sounds wonderful to me. Much to be learned.
Let's see. These people are lots of comments about how much they love your books. I'm just trying to find some more actual questions. Okay, here's a good one. Elizabeth says, love all your books. Right now reading Joanna Brady's series. Was wondering if you miss your characters when you're not writing about them.
Well, when I'm not writing about them, I'm usually writing about somebody else.
Right.
But when I go back to the ones that have been sort of at rest, it's like getting a Christmas card from friends in faraway places, because you get to catch up on everything you've missed in the meantime. And the only way to catch up with them is for me to write another book. And so I do.
Excellent.
Speaking of, how about the Walker family? I remember you saying a long time ago that was you thought that was your best book. Do you still feel that way?
Well, I think Hour of the Hunter is still a really remarkable book. I heard from a woman named White Fawn, whose father is a Pima, and her father doesn't have internet, but she wrote to me to tell me how much he likes my Walker books and wondering how I got to know so much about them. That really meant a lot to me. But I'm considering writing another Walker book, but I don't know if that will happen or not. I can't promise.
Well, I have to say that Hour of the Hunter, we have sold hundreds, if not at least 1,000 copies of it. It is a really remarkable book, and in part autobiographical. So Judy's going to be the a guest of honor at Left Coast Crime in Tucson next year. This year it's in Albuquerque, but next year it'll be in Tucson. And since that's an area around there where Hour of the Hunter and the Tohono O'odham Reservation. Probably be a good book to revisit, and talk about when you're having your author interview. Then, because it really is a remarkable book, and not a book that's ever going to date, because the issues in it will not. So Judy, thank you for your time. Let me remind everybody that Nothing to Lose, that she will be at the Poison Pen on March 14th at 7:00 in the evening. Eager to see you and sign your book. And if you can't come and you'd like her to personalize the copy, you can order it on our web store and request a personalization. But I hope that you'll be able to come out and have a chance to reconnect, because it's been a long time.
It has been a long time.
On the other hand, we have had some really fabulous conversations on Zoom.
That's right.
Because we're not dealing with anybody else. It's just us, Patrick, Judy, and me. And they've been really meaningful, Judy. So, I'm glad that we've had this opportunity to, to talk in a different setting than in front of a crowd at the store.
What was it? What TV series was? I'm so glad we've had this time together.
Right. But I know that you love an audience. You really do. So it'll be invigorating for Judy to see you. So I do.
She has some new songs too. Do you have any new songs in your repertoire?
No new songs. No new songs. But my friend Janice Ian is touring in Arizona right now.
Really?
And will be in Phoenix and Tucson when I'm in Florida. But she's coming, and she has a new album called I'm Still Standing. And of course, she is still standing. She's a rock star she's still out there. We
like
both
us.
are.
Yay. Right. So on that cheery note, thank you very much for spending time with us this evening. We appreciate it. There'll be a podcast available in the next day or two, in case you want to mention that to your friends or just listen to the program again. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. Judy, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.